In the latter part of the last century there lived a man of science, who had experienced a spiritual reaction more striking than any chemical one. He had left his laboratory in the care of his assistant, washed the stains of chemicals from his fingers, and asked a beautiful woman to become his wife. In those days, new scientific discoveries such as electricity seemed to open paths into the area of miracles. The scientist loved his wife very much, but his real love was science and its mysteries. The scientist's name was Aylmer. He had so totally given himself to scientific studies that he could not be weakened by a second love. His love for his young wife could only be stronger than science if it was joined with science. Such a union did take place with truly remarkable results. But one day, very soon after their marriage, Aylmer looked at his wife with a troubled expression.
"Georgiana,"
he said,
"have you ever considered that the mark upon your cheek might be removed?"
"No,"
she said, smiling. But seeing the seriousness of his question, she said,
"People say that this mark is a charm, and I too like it and believe this."
"On another face it might be a charm, but not on yours,"
answered her husband.
"No, my dear Georgiana, nature made you so perfect, but this birthmark shocks me."
"Shocks you?"
cried Georgiana, deeply hurt. Her face reddened with a bit of anger, and then she burst into tears.
"Then why did you marry me? You cannot love what shocks you."
In the center of Georgiana's left cheek there was a mark, deep in her skin. The mark was usually a deep red color. When Georgiana blushed, the mark became less visible. But when she turned pale, there was the mark, like a red stain upon snow. The mark was shaped like a very small human hand. Georgiana's past lovers used to say that the hand of a magical fairy had touched her face when she was born. But other people had different opinions. Some jealous young women said that it destroyed Georgiana's beauty. Before marriage, Aylmer did not think about this birthmark. But after his marriage, Aylmer discovered that he hated that birthmark. Now it had become a frightening obsession. Georgiana's beauty was almost perfect, and he could not tolerate this defect. He wanted Georgiana to get rid of that mark. Aylmer started to believe that this mark was a sign of his wife's sadness, sickness, and death. Soon, the birthmark caused him more pain than Georgiana's beauty had ever given him pleasure. During a period that should have been their happiest, Aylmer only thought about the birthmark every time. With the morning light, Aylmer opened his eyes looking at the little hand on his wife's face. When they sat together in the evening near the fire, he would look at the mark. It was the mark of her imperfection. Georgiana soon began to fear his look. His expression would make her face go pale. And the birthmark would stand out like a red jewel on white stone.
"Do you remember, dear Aylmer, about the dream you had last night about this hateful mark?"
she asked with a weak smile.
"No, I don't remember,"
answered Aylmer, surprised. The mind always dreams about the things we see in our real life. Aylmer now remembered his dream. He had imagined himself with his assistant Aminadab trying to remove the birthmark with an operation. But the deeper his knife went, the little hand went deeper and deeper. At last the little hand caught Georgiana's heart and Aylmer wanted to cut it away. Aylmer felt guilty remembering the dream.
Aylmer,
said Georgiana,
I do not know what the cost would be to both of us to remove this birthmark. Removing it could deform my face or damage my health.
Dearest Georgiana, I have thought about this a lot.
said Aylmer.
I am sure it can be removed.
Then remove this mark at any cost,
said Georgiana.
I cannot live with this mark if you hate it. You have deep science and have made great discoveries. Remove this little mark for the sake of your peace and my own.
Dearest wife,
cried Aylmer,
do not doubt my power. I am ready to make this cheek as perfect as the other cheek.
Her husband gently kissed her right cheek, the one without the red hand. The next day the couple went to Aylmer's laboratory where he had made all his famous discoveries. Georgiana would live in a beautiful room he had prepared nearby, while he worked tirelessly in his lab. One by one, Aylmer tried a series of powerful experiments on his wife. But the mark remained on her cheek. Georgiana waited in her room. She read through his notebooks of scientific observations. Then one day, she saw that many of his experiments had ended in failure. Then she decided to see herself, the scientist at work. The first thing that struck Georgiana when entering the laboratory was the hot furnace. From the amount of soot above it, it seemed to have been burning for ages. She saw machines, tubes, cylinders, and other containers for chemical experiments. What most drew her attention was Aylmer himself. He was nervous and pale as death as he worked on preparing a liquid. Georgiana realized that her husband had been hiding his tension and fear.
Do not think about me. I am ready to take all risks to get rid of this mark,
she said.
I will drink whatever you make for me, even if it is a poison.
My dear, nothing shall be hidden,
Aylmer said.
I have already given you chemicals powerful enough to change your entire physical system. Only one thing remains to be tried, and if that fails, we are ruined.
He led her back to her room where she waited once more, alone with her thoughts. She hoped and wanted to be as perfect as her husband wanted her to be. But then she realized that Aylmer would always want something better, newer, and perfect. Hours later, Aylmer returned carrying a crystal glass with a colorless liquid.
The chemical process went perfectly,
he said.
I promise you that it cannot fail.
To test the liquid, he placed a drop in the soil of a dying flower growing in a pot in the room. In a few moments, the plant became healthy and green once more.
I do not need proof,
Georgiana said quietly.
I am happy to put my life in your hands.
She drank the liquid and immediately fell asleep. Aylmer sat next to his wife, observing her and taking notes. He noted everything, her breathing, the movement of an eyelid. He stared at the birthmark. And slowly, with every breath that came and went, it lost some of its brightness.
By heaven! It is nearly gone,
said Aylmer.
Success! Success!
He opened the window coverings to see her face in daylight. She was so pale. Georgiana opened her eyes and looked into the mirror her husband held. She tried to smile as she saw the barely visible mark, then she looked at Aylmer. She was worried.
My poor Aylmer,
She said gently.
I know your intention was very noble and you wanted me to be a perfect wife, but now I am dying, dearest.
It was true. The hand on her face had been her link to life. When the mark disappeared slowly, Georgiana's life also disappeared slowly and slowly. And then she died. Aylmer was blinded by a meaningless imperfection and an impossible goal. But he did not realize that perfection was not a part of this world. Aylmer had thrown away her life and his happiness,